Hey, what's up, everyone? What's up, YouTube? I want to take the time just to talk about this whole Ed Reed, Deion Sanders, Bethune-Cookman, Jackson State situation. A lot of people have come to me, or some people have come to me, and I see a lot of people who have their kind of own opinion of what happened, what the situation was, and like typically what happens a lot when something like this comes up, people don't want to do the research, right? People are lazy. And the easiest thing for them to do is formulate their own opinion from other people's opinions without doing the research. What I think is the most important thing is do your research, especially when it comes to HBCUs and why the situation is consistent among, coach just people at HBCUs or players who come back and coach at HBCUs. But I think the most important thing is to go back and figure out, okay, how did this thing come about, right? Understanding HBCUs is not just something to think, oh, you watch Stomp the Yard or you watch some type of movie and you think it's this amazing environment. And don't get me wrong, it's great, but there's a lot that goes on to an HBCU that people who are in that community know about. So just kind of going back, I want to talk about the history of HBCUs and talk about why there's lack of funding and why the situation is tough, and then talk about the comparison to PWIs. And I want to talk then I want to end and finish out with talking about football specifically and why Deion Sanders is able to get athletes to come to where he's at. Simply, mainly that. And I think the NIL, it does help out, but mainly I want to talk about the history and then how we get to the point with Ed Reed. So apparently Ed Reed came out and, he talked about the campus, talked about how trashy it was, talked about the mishandling of funds, which I don't think he really had the time to really see the mishandling of funds for the time period that he was there. But I think mainly he was frustrated with the facilities, and he probably asked about why the facilities are like this, and he did not get an answer that he liked. But going back to HBCUs, most HBCUs were established in the mid 1800s to late 1800s. So the first one was actually established in 1837. During this time period, large grants from the land grants from the government for black colleges were awarded, and it was awarded with the U.S. Morrill Land Grant Acts. That's the U.S. Morrill Land Grant Acts. This essentially granted land for African Americans, to build colleges on particular land, and this is kind of like the start of HBCUs. Of course, because blacks couldn't go to PWIs. So now there is a difference between some private institutions that are HBCUs versus the public institutions that are HBCUs, and there's a little bit of difference, and I'll talk about that later. So if we kind of fast forward to the 1930s, many of the one thing I think is unique about HBCUs in itself is the fact that in the 1930s, when a lot of Jewish scholars were fleeing the country because of the anti-Jewish legislation under Hitler, HBCUs opened them with arms because they understood that these scholars, these professors from that were Jewish, that were getting stripped of their opportunities, that came with vast knowledge. Not only did the black institutions like the diversity, but also it helped them strengthen the institution to get these scholars from that were facing, again, their jobs stripped and facing anti-Semitism, but just going through the Hitler reign that came, in Germany, that came over. So I think that was one thing to kind of mention is how open HBCUs are to other cultures. Then I want to go down and talk about the Higher Education Act of 1965. I'm going to read the law here. The law was intended to strengthen the educational resources of our colleges and to provide the financial assistance for students in post-secondary higher education. It increased federal money given to universities, created scholarships, gave low-interest loans for students, and established a national teachers corps. The financial assistance for students is covered in Title IX of the HEA. Well, this is set by the government, and HBCUs were not included in this. Right, so now there were changes made later on in 1986. The amendments, 1986, the amendments to the HEA included the creation of funding a stream for historically black college universities. So in '86, that there was amendments that were made to help that was proposed, right? This is a proposal in 86. I want you to understand how how long law can take. So it was proposed in 1986, and it was proposed by bipartisan support. So literally the Democrats and Republicans worked together on this, and they felt it was something good to present forward. And the changes were actually made in 1992. This is the real, and I'm just going to read the verbiage here. The 1992 reauthorization of the HEA was praised for its bipartisanship, developed in a Democratic Congress and signed by Republican presidents. This back then, Republicans and Democrats, they may have not disagreed, but they still worked together on some issues. The legislation significantly expanded the student loan program by creating an unsubsidized version of the loans to any student, regardless of whether the financial aid formula determined they had unmet needs. In the 1992 presidential campaign, universal access to the loans had become a policy supported by both major parties. So we have bipartisanship that of a law that supported, essentially supported not just HBCUs, but all universities, but HBCUs got included in that in 1986. I want to go back to 1980. And this is where you got to think 1980, right? 1980 is only 40 years ago. So this is some of your parents who graduated from HBCUs were not necessarily getting the funding that they get now. So in 1980, Jimmy Carter signed an executive order. So executive order is something that doesn't go through Congress, but with the executive powers of the executive branch, the president can do executive orders. Donald Trump did some of these. Joe Biden did this with the student loan forgiveness. So you see president kind of overstepping the different branches, right? Which it still has to go through the court of law, right? The court of law go through certain branches to approve of this. So for example, Joe Biden did student loan forgiveness, and then now it's going through the judicial branch. So it still has to go through the court of law, even though it may be put in practice before it's an actual law. There's precautionary measures that the government can take to push towards these executive orders. So in 1980, Jimmy Carter signed an executive order to distribute adequate resources and funds to strengthen the nation's public and private HBCUs. Now, this is good. The verbiage here is important because public and private HBCUs, some institutions that started private, they're not receiving governmental funding. So understand that's important. His executive, not entirely, but they don't specifically receive the type of support public institutions do. Of course, public institutions are under the realm and the guidelines of the government. So in 1980, Jimmy Carter signed an executive order to distribute adequate resources and funds to strengthen the nation's public and private HBCUs. His executive order created the White House Initiative on Historically Black College Universities, which is the WHIBCU, which is federally funded program that operates within the U.S. Department of Education. So pretty much a coalition of HBCUs coming together to talk about how the funds should be distributed. I want to talk about bipartisanship, both parties working together. Now understand, this is the history of HBCUs when it comes specifically to funding, right? In 1989, George H.W. Bush continued, just George Bush Sr., right? George H.W. Bush Sr. continued Carter's pioneering spirit by signing an executive order on Order 12677, which created the Presidential Advisory Board on HBCUs to counsel the government and the secretary on the future development of these organizations. So the organizations were formed. Now there's a board to actually make this come to life that have more experience about what's happening and what's going on with HBCUs. Very important there. Once again, we have bipartisanship. George W. Bush continuing Carter's pioneering spirit. Now, whenever I see something as an executive order, I think as a last result, ideally it will like to be put through Congress and then be a law, right? Amendment, actual law. But the executive orders still show that even though one president that's on one side continued to do something on a president's on the other side. So now I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. We're gonna fast forward to 2015. Once again, there was more push for HBCUs. 2015. Now 2015, I was out of my HBCU. I was gone. I wasn't there anymore. right? My wife and I both, we weren't going there anymore. In 2015, the Bipartisan Congressional Historically Black College Universities Caucus was established by the U.S. Representatives Alma S. Adams and Bradley Byrne. The caucus advocates for HBCUs on Capitol Hill. So now we get some true representation on Capitol Hill from our Senate, our Congress. So, but this is, like I said, this is U.S. representatives, right? So now let's go 2015 as well too. 2015. In 2015, the share. Oh, actually, I'm gonna skip that over, and then I'm gonna go to now. When it comes to football, right? We talk about like, well, hey, look, HBCUs are this, HBCUs are that. Understand that HBCUs are still a new thing and still haven't received the funding that they should have. There's a lot of land grants that of course, over time the number would have grown, but land grants and interest as well too that are owed to black universities from the U.S. Moral Land Grants Act. Essentially, if an HBCU an HBCU is established through this land grant, which gave land back to the indigenous, African Americans who were slaves, or just that land that was tended by slaves. If they got money back, they got that land back to build a university on it, university on it. There's still funding that should have went their way, and that funding has interest over time, but HBCUs weren't paid on the interest. So HBCUs weren't getting paid through the government of what they should have got paid, and you see a lot of these HBCUs coming together and they're suing the government. So, for example, Maryland took the HBCUs took Maryland to court, and Maryland HBCUs ended up with the $577 million settlement. And then, so you have, and then same thing. Tennessee's doing the same exact thing. So these HBCUs are coming together, and what they're doing is they're looking to see how they can kind of advocate to get their just due. So understand that HBCUs have been underfunded. HBCUs have been underfunded for a long time, and completely underfunded in comparison to PWIs when it comes from public universities. Now, as we shift over to football, when you think of some of the best first of all, the GOAT, the best player ever to play is Jerry Rice, HBCU, Walter Payton, Michael Strahan, Buck Buchanan, Mel Blount, Art Shell, Shannon Sharp, Aeneas Williams, John Starworth, Charlie Joyner, Steve McNair, Doug Williams, Donald Driver, Jimmy Smith, Antoine Bethea, Rasheem Mathis, Jacoby Jones, all went to HBCUs. Now, HBCUs used to have the best talent. They used to have the best talent, and the talent was exceptional there. Now, we think of Coach Paul Bear Bryant, right? One of the best coaches that we consider in college football, coached at Alabama. When he was coaching in the during the 60s and 70s, they used to be a powerhouse. But then what happened was Alabama started sucking. They started pretty much being 500%, 500% every year, and they realized that their talent wasn't there. But what Bear Bryant, Alabama head coach, right? What he noticed was there was a huge talent difference in these HBCU leagues versus the NCAA, because once again it was still segregated. The blacks couldn't play at PWIs, and the gameplay back then, you got to think 1965. Your parents, you know what I'm saying? Some of your parents were born on that time period, or some of your parents and grandparents played on that, watch football during that time period. Shoot, Shannon, like you think of Shannon Sharp, he went to HBCU, and this is the only opportunity for some black guys. Now Shannon Sharp's not that old, right? But this is the opportunity for a lot of black athletes. Was the HBCU, that was it, and the talent level was there. You think of NFL now. NFL now is over 70% African American black. So you have the talent level in college just as good. It was the same. It represented that. And then, so what did Bear Bryant do? Bear Bryant then said, "Hey, you know what? We're not doing well. Let's tap into this talent pool." Right? It was a perfect situation for Bryant, to kind of stay on top, help Alabama stay on top. But that also meant that HBCUs were getting decimated, because you're taking the talent out. And the idea of the HBCUs truly being talented was just a myth because the talent was getting stripped from the top talent was getting stripped from the HBCUs and going to like these top PWIs who can afford them, who can pay for them, who can give them what they want. I say that it's important because just like you see athletes right now, they're not going to school because they really want to go there. They're going to school because they're NIL. Some of them are going to school because they're NIL deal. I hate to say it, but for a lot of black people, if you put a price on their head, they'll forget what they stand for. And I'm not mad if you want to go to a PWI and make a better living for your family. I completely get that, and that's a lot of weight to put on a college athlete. A college athlete whose family comes from nothing. You can't expect college athletes to make that decision based on, hey, this is the right thing to do, because that conscience isn't there. These are 17, 18-year-old kids who are just trying to figure out life, and to put that type of pressure on them, that's why I see a lot of athletes who go through the NFL, they start giving back to HBCUs when they get that certain status. So the NBA has been great at giving back to the NFL. I'm not sure how well they give back, but NFL has done exceptional as far as NBA has done exceptional as far as giving back to HBCUs. That's a different platform. Some guys jump straight from college, straight from high school, and they give back to HBCUs. But in the NFL, giving back to HBCUs is not there. So what happened, right? So when Alabama, so when Bryant went out west, he saw the number one team at the time, right? USC had an all-black backfield and a black assistant coach. So USC, when the West is typically, the South was racist back then. The West wasn't that people land on the free, go out west, right? They accepted blacks, on their team, and of course they were better. So understand that. Listen to this, okay? September 12th, 1970, the first integrated football game in Alabama was played between USC and Alabama. The first integrated in 1970. We're talking 53 years ago, right? By the end of the 70s, the recruitment of black players to white universities was no longer an anomaly. It was the blueprint for success. If you want to win, start recruiting black athletes, right? We already know that, right? Like I said, it was on the surface, it was great for PWIs, but for the HBCUs, it was the beginning of a drought. And these programs like Grambling, Southern, Florida A&M, which were the top teams at HBCUs, they were dealt the short end of the stick, because like their whole entire brand of attraction, the band, etc., it just decimated. So while HBCUs were getting saturated of talent and then getting dwindled down when it comes to prestige, these PWIs were still in the athletes. Just like you see right now. No athlete's going to go to a HBCU and play to say, hey, I want to play for my... They're not going to do that. I get it, because you can go back, always can use that and go back to help the community. It's tougher to go through that grind and do that. But no athlete's doing that right now. You put a price on somebody's head and they'll forget who they are. I say this all the time. So we come to the situation where Deion Sanders and Ed Reed are like, well, HBCUs, they this, that. If you're in the HBCU community, you understand the money laundering. You understand the mishandling of funds. And it's not that it's so complex that people aren't doing anything about it. People are doing something about it in the university. And to label HBCUs as a whole and say that HBCUs are this, that, you are downplaying the people who are actually trying to help. And where Ed Reed and Deion Sanders did not do their homework, like I said, it was a cash grab for Deion Sanders. This was a 110% cash grab for Deion. Deion's not focused on building a legacy for himself. I mean, for African Americans, he's focused on building a legacy for himself. Hey, look, I'm not mad at you. Go for it. You know what I'm saying? If you want to build a legacy for yourself and your kids, what he did was, from a strategic standpoint, was amazing. But let's just be honest. Deion Sanders and Ed Reed wanted a coaching job without putting the hard work. You see some of these black coaches now, they went up the grind. They were player personnel, special teams, assistant coach, passing team coordinator. They worked their way up the traditional way. That's why the Rooney Rule was created for these black coaches who've been doing well and don't get opportunities. But what did Ed Reed want? He saw what Deion Sanders did. Deion Sanders wanted that quick fix. Deion Sanders wanted to say, "Hey, let me, I want to work up the tree and coach under somebody because I feel like I'm a coach or whatever." He went to Jackson State, got a lot of talent there. By the way, Jackson State lost twice to the MEAC, and then he went to Colorado, right? And he got a head coaching job at Colorado. Florida State doesn't necessarily have a problem with grabbing top recruits, right? Florida State isn't a hotbed of, it's just the coaching that's there, right? You're in a tough conference of coaching, right? And Florida State will get ahead. So when Florida State, there was the talks of Florida State giving him the job, you can't pitch him, hey, recruits come to Florida State anyway. And it's with the transfer portal. You can land athletes in the portal as well too with the big name. So I say that because they weren't aware. And hey, look, I understand they want to help out the community for a certain time period, but Ed Reed couldn't get a coaching job for a while, and then he wants to coach at Bethune. Now he's upset talking about the facilities. Of course they let him go. But just from a standpoint of finances, the difference between an HBCU and a PWI is this. So I want to talk about funding for HBCUs over the past, since Obama's office 08, since over the past 16 years, right? So in President Obama's time, he gave $4 billion to HBCUs, right? In his 8 years of leadership. So we're looking at $1 billion a year. Donald Trump, 2019, signed a bipartisan bill that permanently provides $250 million a year to HBCUs. So that's consistent. That was good, right? It was a bipartisan bill from the left and the right that did that for HBCUs. So the Republicans and Democrats, it wasn't his idea, but he signed it, which was great. Then Biden, right now, since he's been in office, his first year in office, he provided historic $5.8 billion to HBCUs, and in 2022, Biden's administration announced an additional $2.7 billion through his American Rescue Plan. So Biden has given, almost $8 billion, a little over $8 billion to HBCUs since he's been in office, in his 2 years in office. So, when we talk about the president that's given the most, it's Biden to HBCUs. So understand, over that time period, you look at the $4 billion from Biden, the $250 so far, let's just say since 2019, 2003, so $1 billion from Donald Trump, and then you got the $8.5 billion from Biden. You're looking at roughly maybe $14 billion a year for, my math may be off, whatever, but $14 billion a year for HBCUs. Right? Now, I want to give you guys a scope. So an endowment is how much the university is. And this is it. We're not talking just a football program. We're talking HBCUs in total. So it's not going specifically to the football program. An endowment is how much the university actually is. So just to give you perspective, University of Maryland, where I work at, the endowment, how much that university is, $997 million. For Alabama, $1 billion. Georgia, $1.82 billion. Ohio State, $7 billion. Michigan, $17 billion. Right? So think of that. In Michigan, it is how much the university has right now has more funding than HBCUs have got over the previous 16 years. All right? Now, you say, well, HBCUs make money. I'm going to give you retrospect, all right? So you think $17 billion, Michigan, $7 billion, Ohio State. Do you really think in Norfolk State, where I went, right? How much the endowment is? $24.4 million. Right? That's that one player in the NFL, NBA makes more than that in a year. Bethune-Cookman, $47.8 million. Right? Kyler Murray makes more than that. Deshaun Watson makes more than that 1 year. Patrick Mahomes makes more than that 1 year. Jackson State, $60 million. Now, Howard is an anomaly. It's a private institution. It's the wealthiest HBCU, $839 million for Howard, a D.C. local university, which gets a lot of funding from the district. So but to understand the difference in funding, HBCUs aren't even a fraction of the whole HBCU. Probably is think facilities at these universities, these large PWIs, are worth more than the whole universities of HBCUs. So when it comes to competition, when it comes to what a university can provide for a player, what a university can a um, provide for a player, it's incomparable to what these PWIs can afford. If Deion Sanders and Ed Reed did simple research, just simple research on HBCUs, they would have known this. But the thing is, hey, look, I'm not passing judgment on anybody, but is it naive to go in and then do that and then go out bashing HBCUs? Right? I think that was uncharacteristic of Ed Reed. I think he reacted. He was upset. Right? He saw what Deion did and got a job. He wanted to do the same as that thing. But Deion didn't help HBCUs. He hurt HBCUs more than he helped them, because he said he went in there with his money. He did what he wanted to do. He sacrificed, and Deion's not going to take a loss. So Deion, he's not going to take a loss and sacrifice. And he talked about HBCUs on his way out, talked about funding, whatever it is, and he left a bad impression on HBCUs. He made HBCUs, the perception of HBCUs, worse than it was before, right? And he built himself up. And you have people who are completely ignorant, who have no idea, that just, like I said, want to get the public opinion and not do the research and make their opinion off of that. That's the dumbest thing. Y'all listen to these podcasts. This is what pisses me off the most. Y'all listen to these podcasts and them recycling information that's already known to help your self-esteem. There's one that says, I see it all the time, if you can't stay motivated, stay consistent. That's the most basic quote, but you hit them podcasts, y'all be like, oh man, right? Oh, that's deep. It's not deep. It's common sense. Just keep doing it. Even when you don't want to do it, keep doing it. Yeah, you guys. So when you guys get an opinion of Deion Sanders and stuff, y'all look at his lifestyle. Y'all look at his lavish lifestyle. You look at his status, and you don't look at what actually happened, because you desire the status that they have, and you don't. Building a legacy for HBCUs is not a touch point. I mentioned this before. If you truly want to help HBCUs, it's not a quick touch point. It's not a 1 year get in there and leave. It is an investment over years, and you may die never ever seeing the fruits of your labor, but you will build a legacy that contributed to the rebirth of HBCUs. Ed Reed and Deion Sanders had no interest in that. They had interest in building their own careers. So when people ask me my take on Deion Sanders and HBCUs, and I went to HBCU. I played at HBCU. I lived in the dorm that was rough. I lived in the dorm that had no AC. I lived in the dorm with cockroaches. I lived in the dorm, listen, everyone had cockroaches at Norfolk State. I lived in the dorm that, lacked hot water. I lived in the dorm that, where it was flooded. That wasn't the best conditions. I played football where you had rundown cleats. I played football where you had the practice field was a walkway to a bus stop and a grocery store. We went through these conditions, right? And we wore Russell Athletic. The MEAC had a stronghold on Russell Athletic. The Russell Athletic had a stronghold on the MEAC. You couldn't wear Nike. Russell Athletic had a chokehold on the MEAC. Because if you came out with anything but Russell Athletic on, they're going to penalize you. From socks, gloves, anything like that, mouthpieces, whatever. Russell Athletic, hey, look, big shout out to Russell Athletic, because they held the MEAC down for the longest. And then when we left, they started getting Nike gear. But literally, you didn't get the best of the best, right? Nike gave us cleats, which was cool, but then you don't always get the best cleats. You want a new pair of cleats? Sometimes you have to. Our Coach Wright, our equipment manager, go in the closet, grab some cleats that he found or whatever that someone left in the field and give them to you. And you got to use those cleats. That's that. But the athletes that were there, the guys I played around, were there to play football, and they loved the game, right? They loved the game of football. And when you're playing and competing, that stuff doesn't matter. It does not matter. I'm not worried about how my cleats look when I'm out there competing. I love the game. And that's the kid and people who love football. So I've been through that grind of going to a HBCU. They weren't aware of that. Now, I want to say that because Eddie George, Hall of Fame running back, played for the Tennessee Titans, is actually a coach for Tennessee State. But you don't hear him in the news. You don't hear him in the headlines talking about this, XYZ. You don't hear him doing that. Right? You see him going through the grind. He was on a recent podcast, and this is what he said. Eddie George, this is what he said. He said, and you know it's frustrating. You know, he didn't understand exactly what he was getting himself into, talking about Ed Reed. And when you get under the hood, you really see what's going on. You do see the mold in the apartments. You see the mold in the dorms. You see the facilities. The locker room is not the best. It's not clean. It's all those things. But guess what? That's why you're there, and that's why I chose to do it through action. You know, I chose to do it through, you know, hey, let me roll up my sleeves, get in front of these people, corporations, the school president, you know, the politicians, and say basically, what are we doing here? Right? So Ed Reed is not there to leave. He's there to hold people accountable, do what they're supposed to. Now, of course, right? The school president, the corporations, right? They fund universities, a lot of them do. But HBCUs don't have a deep boosters. They don't have a deep alumni support. Yeah, people give back, but it's nowhere in comparison to what these other PWIs get. And don't get me wrong, mishandling of funds happens at PWIs as well too. But it's easy to blame like blackon.com. It's easy to blame HBCUs when you're trying to work through something. It's just quieter at PWIs. I'm gonna tell you, it's just quieter at PWIs, right? But Eddie George went on to say this as well too. He said, I've got to see that change happen, right? He's saying, I've got to see that change happen. So it's much bigger than just football. It's providing a quality of life that these students absolutely deserve. You know, getting their Pell Grant money on time, you know, making sure that they're well fed. All these things have to change. You know, the football games are one thing, but the quality of life and the experience of the education that provides for our students for years to come is much more important. He's there for the investment. He's not there for a touch point. You don't see him in the headlines. You don't see him, you know, having his own documentary, right? He's there and doing the grunt work of and for there's people. He's just a small example of millions of people in HBCUs who are advocating, who are trying to actively help HBCUs in itself. And to badmouth or to talk about HBCUs on your way out and then discredit all those people, majority of the people, as a few bad apples, majority of the people, it's just wrong. You're hurting HBCUs. Now, I want to say, well, what's the solution? HBCUs. I think there's a great solution that these PWIs do as well too, right? But it's a great solution for HBCUs. So FAMU has a recipe, I believe, for success. I think, first of all, it's three things. It's audit practices, right? Working with leadership in universities, and understanding the climate, and it's also a slow grind. Meaning understanding what you're getting yourself into, and then understanding it's going to take time. Right? We're talking since the 1970s, the first integrated college game was played, right? And HBCUs really didn't get funding until 1980s, and they're still well underfunded compared to PWIs, right? So when you talk about that, right? When you think about that, right? This is FAMU. Over the past year, FAMU has received a clean financial statement audits for the university and the three direct support organizations: the FAMU Alumni Association, the alumni, the FAMU Foundation, the FAMU Rattler Boosters. In January, the university received the absolute best Auditor General operational audit in 10 years. Right? So FAMU was actively saying, hey, if we really want to change the dynamic, let's audit ourselves. Like, let's see what's going on. And these audit companies are going to come in, look at the financials, look at the records, and figure out, hey, what's wrong? And address it. But that's the recipe for success. And listen, just like in Tennessee's fighting the HBCUs in Tennessee are fighting Tennessee to get their money back from being unfunded from the land grants. There's many HBCUs who are doing that as well too. I go on and say that as this. It's so easy to get offended about HBCUs, about whatever HBCUs did to you, or whatever HBCUs, the perception of it is, and then badmouth HBCUs without even being immersed in it, or not even putting a genuine effort. And that's what Ed Reed and Deion Sanders did. It was a touch point. A year. You got to think, when that coach, Eddie Robinson, whatever his name is, called out Deion, said he wasn't swag. He wasn't. And it was the truth. And we laughed at that coach because they lost to Jackson State. But he wasn't swag. But we like Deion Sanders because they beat his team. They said, hey, look, we beat y'all. We are Grambling. We are swag. And we marveled at Deion, right? Because Deion, he won. He's sitting high and pretty, right? He's looking good. We marveled at Deion. But the true, he shows true colors. He's not swag. Because that coach, Eddie Robinson, was in it. And he's in it right now. And most of the people in this world aren't loyal, are okay with that. And most of the people in this world who aren't loyal are okay with that. They're okay with just, hey, look, like I'm a stunt, I'm a shine. Because people are naive. That's why you put a price on somebody's head and they'll forget who they are. So don't, like, when you have an opinion or a thought, challenge your thought. Do the research. Figure out what's really going on before you go out and say something or think about something that's not even true. Deion Sanders hurt HBCUs tremendously. It has left HBCUs. Deion Sanders has left HBCUs with a bad taste in everyone's mouth. But he's building his own personal empire. You see it all the time. People forget who they are and they go and they get their own stats and they're good. There's got to be a conscious that you have as a black man going to a HBCU, regardless of the situation, and leaving talking about HBCUs hurting the black community. And that's the problem. So Deion Sanders he built himself up, right? And y'all going to watch him, y'all going to follow him, etc., right? He's flashing. Ed Reed, I think he was a little bit more, I think it was mainly for coaching for Ed Reed. He saw the track that he did, and he didn't realize how rough it was because there are players who are doing it. Eddie George is doing it. So that's my take on it. I know it's a long-winded take, but I'm really sick and tired of seeing this narrative of Deion. Hey, Deion, he go ahead and leave. You don't deserve Jackson State doesn't deserve you. No, he didn't deserve Jackson State. And even though they thought he was going to go there for a long run, which it sucked. He wasn't. Because you want better. He's building a legacy for himself, which he already has, right? A football player, right? He's building a legacy for himself. He has no interest in building a legacy for HBCUs. Same thing as Ed Reed. So that's my take on it. Do your homework. If you think anything I said was wrong, fact check me, right? Understand that, and then you'll start developing a wise opinion on this HBCU situation with Ed Reed and Deion Sanders, not just what you see on Instagram. Because y'all really like to look on Instagram, listen to reporters, go on Instagram, and not do research. Right now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of reporters and a lot of things you see on Instagram that are true. You check with consistency of what people are saying, but still go check, do your own research, not just what Deion because you like his lifestyle. Right, and that's how most of y'all operate. So, y'all forget who y'all are because y'all self-esteem is low and you desire a certain lifestyle that Deion has. Right? You want the Deion comfortable lifestyle. You want the convenient lifestyle. Right? It was really convenient for him to leave. It was not convenient for him to stay and help HBCUs. But when the going gets tough, most of the cowards run. Right? So, hey, look, man. I went to HBCU, so I'm passionate about it, and I don't hate it, but when people especially when, people who have no idea whether you're black, white, whatever, downplay HBCUs, it just shows your ignorance, especially with HBCUs being widely underfunded. So, but hey, look, that's my take. If you want to comment below. Hey, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. I feel like sound like one of those regular YouTubers. Hey, subscribe. But definitely subscribe. Like, comment, share. That also helps as well too. If you don't like my content, but you think somebody will, throw this video to them. Throw some of my content to them. I really appreciate it. Hey, look, y'all. I'm out.